Hey guys, tonight we are going to talk about the money of a man who has been dead for nearly 2,000 years. A soldier of Rome, an ordinary man in an ordinary legion, standing watch on a cold frontier, holding a spear he would rather not use, thinking, as soldiers in every age have thought, about when he would next be paid. And here is the strange, quiet, slightly unsettling thing we are going to discover together, in no hurry at all, over the next couple of hours. That soldier, in some ways that truly matter, may have been better off than you, more secure than you, better housed, in his old age, than you may ever be, given, at the end of his working life, a reward so large that most people listening tonight will never see its equal. He was not rich. Nobody is calling him rich. But he was held, he was provided for. He knew, more or less, how his story would end. And it would end with a roof and a field and a full belly. And that, my friend, is a kind of wealth we have half forgotten how to name. So, before you get comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always 2 in the morning somewhere. Also, thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You know who you are. And if this channel helps you drift off, tap the like button and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for some sweet background hum, and get comfortable, because we have a long and gentle journey ahead of us tonight, back through the centuries to the ancient world and its curious cures for a troubled mind. Picture a fort on a frontier, somewhere near the far edge of the empire, in the grey hour before dawn. It might be in the north, on the wet green border of Britain, where the wind comes off the moors and everything is the colour of slate. It might be on the Rhine, or the Danube, or out in the dry hills above the Dead Sea. Wherever it is, it looks much the same, because Rome built its forts to a pattern, the way we build our petrol stations to a pattern, so that a soldier moved from one end of the empire to the other would always know where the gate was, and where the granary was, and where he would sleep. It is a rectangle, with rounded corners, like a playing card laid flat on the earth. A ditch runs around it, and then a wall, of turf or timber or stone, with towers at the corners and a gate on each of the 4 sides. Inside, the buildings are laid out in neat straight lines along straight streets, because Rome loved a straight line the way it loved almost nothing else. There is the headquarters building in the middle, and the commander's house beside it, and the granaries with their raised floors to keep the grain dry, and the long narrow barrack blocks where the soldiers sleep, row upon row of them, like the pages of a closed book. And in this hour, the fort is almost silent. The fires have burned down to embers. The men are asleep in their bunks, wrapped in wool against the cold, breathing slow. On the walls, the sentries of the night watch stamp their feet and blow into their hands and count the minutes until they are relieved. Somewhere, a horse shifts in the stable. Somewhere, a dog turns over in the dust. The sky in the east is just beginning to go from black to a deep and hopeful blue. This is the world we are going to live in tonight. Not the world of battles and emperors and marble, the loud Rome of the history books, but this quieter Rome, the Rome of the ordinary soldier, in the ordinary fort, on the ordinary morning, the Rome of the pay chest and the ration and the leaking boot and the letter from home. Because it is here, in the small change of daily life, that we will find our answer to the odd little question in the title. Here, among sleeping men on a cold frontier, is where we will learn why you, in your warm house, with your clever telephone and your endless choices, might still be, in certain ways, the poorer of the two. Let us choose one of these sleeping men and follow him. He does not need to be anyone special. In fact, it is better if he is not. Let him be an ordinary soldier of an ordinary legion, a man of about 30, with a scar on one forearm and a bad tooth he keeps meaning to have pulled. We do not need to know his name, though soldiers like him have left us their names, scratched on tombstones and pay slips, and little wooden tablets all across the old empire. Let us just call him our man, and watch him sleep, and think about how he got here. He was not conscripted. That is the first thing to understand, and it surprises people. By the height of the empire, the Roman army was not a mob of pressed men dragged from their farms. It was a professional, volunteer, long-service force, and our man joined it on purpose, of his own free will, the way a young person today might sign up for a career in a large and demanding company. He would have been 17 or 18 or 20 when he did it. He would have walked to a town and stood in front of an officer and been looked over like a horse at a fair, his height checked, his eyes checked, his health checked, his legal status as a free man confirmed. And then he would have taken an oath, a solemn and binding oath, to serve. And what he signed up for was long. This is the second thing to understand. He signed up for 25 years, not 2, not 5, 25, a quarter of a century of his one short life, promised in a single morning to the service of the emperor and the eagles. If he was 20 when he swore the oath, he would be 45 before he was free of it, assuming he lived that long, which was by no means certain. It is a length of service almost impossible for us to imagine now, when many of us change jobs every few years and think nothing of it. He was committing to a single employer for longer than many modern marriages last. Why would anyone do such a thing? For some, it was escape. Escape from a life of grinding farm labour, from a village with no future, from a family with too many mouths and too little land. For some it was adventure, the chance to see the wider world, to leave the place they were born and never go back. For some it was simply that the army offered something their old life could not. Regular food, regular pay, a place to belong, a structure to a life that might otherwise have had none. The legion took a poor young man with nothing and gave him a trade, a wage, a bed, and a family of sorts, rough and profane, and violent though that family often was. And here, already, before we have even reached the question of money, you can feel the shape of the thing we are going to explore. Because for all its brutality, for all its danger, the Roman army offered its ordinary soldiers something that is increasingly rare in our own restless world. It offered certainty, a known path. You gave them your 25 years, and in return they told you, more or less exactly, what your life would look like and how it would end. There is a terror in that, and there is also, if you look at it in a certain light, a deep and enviable comfort. Let that sleeping soldier and his long, promised years settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the thing he thought about most, the thing every soldier in every age thinks about, which is the day he would be paid. 3 times a year the money came, not weekly, not monthly, the way we are used to. 3 times a year, in the early empire, on fixed and known days. The 1st of January, the 1st of May, the 1st of September. On those 3 days the soldier received his stipendium, his pay, 1/3 of his annual wage handed over in a single lump, and those 3 days divided his year, the way festivals divide a calendar, into long stretches of waiting with a reward at the end of each. The amount, in the days of the first emperors, was 225 denarii a year. A denarius was a small silver coin, about the size of a modern penny, and 225 of them a year was, for the time, a respectable working wage. It was roughly what a skilled craftsman might earn. It was a good deal more than a common labourer scratching a living in a town, who might make half as much or less. So when our man took his oath, he was not signing up for poverty. By the standards of the ordinary working people of his world, a soldier's wage was solid, dependable, and just a little bit enviable. Later, the number would grow. The Emperor Domitian, near the end of the 1st century, raised it to 300 denarii a year and added a 4th payday, so the money came 4 times instead of 3. Later still, the Emperor Septimius Severus would raise it again, and his son Caracalla again after that. Though by then, as we shall see near the end of our story, the coins themselves were beginning to lose their meaning, and a rising wage bought a shrinking amount of bread. But in the good years, the settled years, the years we are living in tonight, the pay was steady, and the pay was fair, and 3 times a year the soldier could feel the good weight of silver in his hand. Imagine what those paydays felt like. The whole fort would know the money was coming. There would be a particular mood in the days before, a lightness, a restlessness. And then the day itself, the pay parade, the men lined up by unit, the clerks at their tables with the great chests of coin and the long rolls of names, each man stepping forward as his name was called to receive his due. It was a moment of ceremony as much as commerce. The money did not just buy things. It said something. It said, "You are a soldier of Rome. You are on the rolls. You are one of us." And the empire itself, the greatest power the world had ever seen, knows your name and owes you silver. We have lost that, a little, in the age of the bank transfer, when our pay arrives silently in the night, a number changing on a screen, touched by no hand, marked by no ceremony. There was a weight and a dignity to being paid in coin, in person, in front of your fellows, that the glowing number on the phone cannot quite give us. Our man felt it 3 times a year, the cool silver in the palm. The proof, you might say, held in the hand, that his life had a value, and that someone, somewhere, had counted it out. But here is where our comforting little story takes its first sharp turn. Because the silver that was counted into his hand was not, by any means, the silver he got to keep. Before he ever walked away from that pay table, the army was already reaching back into his purse. And what it took would astonish you. Let that image of the pay parade, the chests of silver, and the long roll of names settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the most remarkable document to survive from the whole world of the Roman soldier. A pay slip, an actual pay slip from an actual man that tells us exactly, coin by coin, where his money went. Of all the things that have come down to us from the Roman army, and there are a great many, from swords to sandals to letters to entire forts, there is one small and fragile object that I find more moving than almost any other. It is a scrap of papyrus, torn and faded, about the size of your hand. It was found in the dry desert dust of a fortress called Masada, in the land we now call Israel, where a Roman army once laid a long and famous siege. And it is a pay slip. It belonged to a soldier named Gaius Messius. We know his name because he wrote it, or someone wrote it for him, at the top of his account, nearly 2,000 years ago. And this little scrap is one of only a tiny handful of such documents ever found in the entire history of the empire. Out of the millions of men who served, out of the countless millions of paydays, we have just 3 of these personal military pay records. Gaius Messius, an ordinary soldier most people have never heard of, is one of the very few Roman soldiers whose actual wages we can read, line by line, in the original ink. And what does it say? It says that he received his pay, 50 denarii for the period, and then it lists, one after another, everything that was taken back out of it. Let us read it together, slowly, the way you might read an old receipt found in the pocket of a coat you have not worn in years. He received 50 denarii. From that 50, he paid 16 denarii for barley, feed for his animal. He paid 20 denarii, or thereabouts, for food, his own rations. He paid 5 denarii for boots. He paid 2 denarii for leather strappings, the bits and pieces that held his kit together. And he paid 7 denarii for a linen tunic, a shirt to wear under his armour. Now add those up. 16 and 20 and 5 and 2 and 7. It comes to 50. Exactly 50. Every last coin of his pay, gone, spent, deducted, before he ever left the table. Gaius Messius, soldier of Rome, veteran of a famous siege, walked away from that payday with nothing at all, not a single coin to jingle in his purse. His wage and his expenses cancelled each other out to the last denarius, and he was left, as one modern writer put it rather beautifully, effectively penniless on payday. There is something almost unbearably human about this. Anyone who has ever looked at a payslip and watched the tax and the pension and the insurance and the rest nibble away at the big number at the top, until the number at the bottom is so much smaller and sadder, will feel a jolt of recognition across 2,000 years. Gaius Messius knew that feeling. He felt it in the heat of the Judean desert, under the eagles of the 10th Legion. The big number at the top, and then the long sad list, and then the little number at the bottom, which in his case was 0. Some things, it seems, do not change. And yet, my friend, this is where you must not let the story fool you, the way it fools so many people who read that sad little payslip and click their tongues and say how terribly they treated their soldiers, because the deductions on that slip are only half the story. In fact, they are much less than half. To understand why Gaius Messius, penniless on payday, was in truth a reasonably fortunate man, we have to look not at what the army took from him, but at what the army was quietly giving him in return, for free, every single day, without it ever appearing on any slip at all. Let that little scrap of papyrus and poor penniless Gaius Messius settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the long list of things the soldier never had to pay for, the hidden wages that the pay slip does not show. Before we come to the gifts, though, let us sit for a moment longer with the deductions, because they tell us a great deal about the daily life of our sleeping soldier, and because there is a strange comfort in the sheer ordinariness of them. Look again at the list. Barley for the animal, food, boots, straps, a tunic. These are not the deductions of a man being cheated. These are the deductions of a man being kitted out and kept alive. The Roman army, in its cool and methodical way, worked on a simple principle. The soldier needed things. The army provided those things. And the cost of those things was taken from the soldier's pay, the way a modern company might deduct the cost of your uniform or your lunch from your wages. It was not charity, and it was not robbery. It was a system, and like all Roman systems, it was written down, added up, and filed in triplicate. So what did the soldier pay for, out of his own wage? He paid for his food, the grain that was ground into the bread that was the foundation of every Roman meal. He paid for his clothing, the tunics and cloaks and boots that wore out with terrible speed on the march and on the drill field. He paid for the replacement of his equipment, the endless small repairs and renewals that any working kit requires. He paid, if he had an animal, for its feed, and he paid, too, into the shared funds of his little group of comrades, the men he lived and cooked and slept alongside, for the pots and the pans and the tent and the grindstone they all used together. There was even, and I find this oddly touching, a burial club. The soldiers paid in, a little at a time, into a common fund, so that when one of them died, whether in battle or in bed, there would be money for a proper funeral, a decent stone, a marker to say that this man had lived and served and was mourned by his fellows. A soldier far from home, who might die 1,000 miles from anyone who had known him as a child, could at least know that he would not be tipped into an unmarked pit. His comrades had paid, and he had paid, so that his name would be carved, and his ashes housed, and his passing marked. Many of the tombstones we can still read today, the ones that tell us the names and ages and years of service of ordinary Roman soldiers, exist because of exactly this. A group of working men, clubbing together, so that death would not be lonely. When you look at the deductions this way, they stop seeming like a cruelty and start seeming like something almost familiar, a working life, with its costs quietly taken care of, food, clothing, kit, a contribution to the common good, and a little put by for the end. It is not so very different when you think about it. from the way a modern payslip works, with its deductions for tax and health and pension, each one a small surrender in the present, in exchange for some security later on. Gaius Messius would have understood a modern payslip perfectly. He would have run his finger down the list of deductions, nodding, recognizing each one. Ah yes, they take it out at the top. They always take it out at the top. But now, having sat with what was taken, we come to the part that changes everything. Because for every denarius the army deducted from the soldier's pay, it was handing back, unbilled and uncounted, a whole life's worth of things that you, tonight, must go out and buy for yourself. Let that long, oddly comforting list of deductions settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the hidden half of the soldier's wage, the things that never touched the pay slip because they were simply given. Here is the part that the sad little pay slip of Gaius Messius does not show you. Here is the hidden half of the ledger. The soldier had a roof over his head, and he did not pay rent for it. Think about that for a moment, you who lie there tonight in a home that likely costs you more than any other single thing in your life. The Roman soldier's housing was simply provided. He slept in the barracks, in a bunk in a small room shared with his closest comrades, and no landlord ever knocked on the door, and no notice of a rent increase ever spoiled his month. The fort was his home, and the fort was free. When he moved, the army moved him, and there was a new roof waiting at the other end. He never once in 25 years had to find a deposit, sign a lease, or lie awake wondering how he would make the payment. The single greatest expense of most modern lives simply did not exist for him. He had heat and light, and he did not pay for those either. The fuel for the fires, the wood and the charcoal that kept the barracks warm through the northern winters and cooked the daily bread, was supplied. The great bathhouse, of which more later, was heated day and night, a marvel of warm water and warm air in a cold and muddy world, and he could use it as much as he liked, for a coin or two, or sometimes nothing at all. He had medical care, real medical care, and it was free. Every large fort had its hospital, its valetudinarium, a proper building with proper rooms, staffed by trained physicians and orderlies, where a sick or wounded soldier was treated at no cost to himself. We will spend a whole quiet chapter in that hospital later tonight, because it is one of the most remarkable things about the whole Roman army, and one of the sharpest points of our comparison. But hold this thought for now. When our man fell ill, or broke a bone, or took a wound, he did not receive a bill. He was simply cared for, and fed, and mended, and sent back to his unit, and no one ever asked him for money. He had a pension waiting for him, a reward at the end so large we will need a whole chapter to take it in. He had the chance of bonuses, gifts of gold from the emperor himself, that could dwarf a year's ordinary pay. He had, if he served in the auxiliaries, the promise of Roman citizenship at the end, a prize beyond price in that world, handed not only to him but to his children. And he had, running quietly underneath all of it, the one thing that is perhaps the rarest of all, then and now. He had security. He knew the pay would come, he knew the food would come, he knew the roof would hold and the doctor would see him, and the reward would be waiting. In a violent and uncertain world, he had been handed a large and solid island of certainty, and told he could stand on it for 25 years. So when you read that Gaius Messius walked away from his payday with nothing in his purse, do not pity him too quickly. His purse was empty, yes, but his belly was full, and his bed was free, and his doctor cost him nothing, and his old age was guaranteed, and none of that was ever written on the slip. The slip showed only the small change of his life, the great wealth of it, the housing and the heat and the healing and the security was invisible, because it was simply the water he swam in. He no more thought to count it than a fish thinks to count the sea. And you, my friend, how much of your pay tonight goes on the roof over your head? How much on the heat and the light? How much vanishes into the insurance that might, one day, if you are lucky, and fill in the forms correctly, pay for the doctor? Count it all up, quietly, without alarm, as you lie there. Count the true cost of your shelter and your safety, and then look again at the empty purse of Gaius Messius, and ask yourself, honestly, which of you keeps more of what he earns? Let that hidden half of the ledger, the great unbilled wealth of shelter and warmth and care, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the small room where the soldier actually lived, and the handful of men who shared it with him. A soldier of Rome did not live alone, and he did not live in a crowd. He lived, all his service long, in a group of 8. They called it a contubernium, which means, more or less, those who share a tent. 8 men, bound together not by choice but by the plain arithmetic of the army, who slept in the same small room or under the same leather tent on the march, who cooked at the same fire, ate from the same pot, ground their grain on the same hand mill, and carried, between them, the shared kit of their little household. 8 men to a tent, 10 tents to a century, 6 centuries to a cohort, 10 cohorts to a legion. The whole vast machine of the Roman army, hundreds of thousands of men spread across 3 continents, was built up, brick by human brick, from these little groups of 8. And it is in the contubernium, I think, that we find one of the quiet secrets of the soldier's contentment, if contentment is not too strong a word for a life so hard. Because these 8 men were a family, not always a happy family. There would have been the one who snored, and the one who never cleaned the pot, and the one who borrowed and did not return, and the one whose feet, in that small closed room, were a daily trial to the others. But they were bound together, and they depended on one another, in a way that most of us, in our separate homes and our separate lives, no longer are. They cooked together. This is worth pausing on. There was no canteen serving the Roman soldier his dinner on a tray. The army issued the raw grain and the raw materials, and the 8 men of the tent turned it into food themselves, grinding the wheat on their shared hand mill, a heavy thing of 2 stone discs that took real muscle to turn, baking the bread, cooking the porridge and the stew, sharing the labor and sharing the result. Every meal was a small act of cooperation. You ground, I will bake. You fetch the water, I will build the fire. The food that kept them alive was food they made together, with their own hands, every single day. They stored their savings together, in a sense, and mourned their dead together, and stood in the battle line together, shield beside shield, each man's life quite literally in the hands of the men to his left and right. When we imagine the loneliness of the soldier, far from home on a cold frontier, we should remember that he was, in another sense, never alone at all. He was one of 8. He woke to their faces and slept to their breathing, and could not have been solitary if he tried. There is a hunger in our own time for exactly this, though we do not always know how to feed it. We live increasingly alone, in our separate boxes, ordering our separate meals, streaming our separate entertainments through separate glowing screens. We have more privacy than any humans in history, and we are, many of us, lonelier than any humans in history. And the two facts are not unconnected. The soldier of Rome had almost no privacy at all. He could not have found solitude in that fort if his life depended on it. And in exchange for that lost privacy, he had something we spend fortunes and lifetimes trying to buy back. He belonged, completely and without question, to a small group of people who needed him and whom he needed, and who would, if it came to it, die at his side. Let those 8 men and their shared pot and their shared fire settle gently in the dark. We turn now, coin in hand, to the marketplace to ask what that silver could actually buy in the world of the Roman soldier. Let us put a single denarius in the soldier's hand, one small silver coin, and follow him out of the fort and down to the little town that clustered outside its walls, and see what he could buy with it. Because a wage means nothing until you know what it purchases, and the purchasing power of that Roman silver tells us a great deal about the true comfort of the soldier's life. A denarius, in the early empire, was roughly a day's wage for a working man. Hold that in mind as a kind of anchor. 1 coin, 1 day of labor. Now, what did a day of labor buy? It bought a great deal of bread. Bread was the foundation of the Roman diet, the thing that filled the belly and did the daily work of keeping a body alive. And bread was cheap. A 1-pound loaf, out in the provinces where our soldier was most likely stationed, might cost a single as, and there were 16 asses to a denarius. So a single silver coin, a single day's wage, could buy well over a dozen loaves of bread. A soldier could feed himself for many days on the wage of 1. If he bought the grain raw, by the bucketful, and ground it himself as the men of the tent always did, it went further still, so much further that a single day's pay could buy enough wheat to feed 1 man for a month or more. It bought wine, the thin, sour, everyday wine that Romans drank watered down all day long, and that cost so little as to be almost an afterthought. It bought oil, the olive oil that was butter and lamp fuel and soap all in one. It bought the small comforts of a soldier's life, a hot meal in the town, a visit to the bath, a game of dice, the company of friends. And when we lift our eyes from the daily bread to the larger purchases, the shape of the soldier's world comes into focus. A pig, a whole live pig, might cost him 5 denarii, a few days' wage. A cow, a proper cow, a serious animal, might run to 100 denarii or more, a substantial sum, the best part of half a year's pay. And a farm, a small working farm with land and a house, the sort of place a man might dream of retiring to, could be had for a few thousand denarii, a sum that sounds impossibly far beyond the reach of a soldier earning a couple of hundred a year. Except, and here is the seed of the whole story, it was not beyond his reach at all, because the soldier was not trying to buy that farm out of his daily wage, with its endless deductions and its empty payday purse. He was going to be handed the price of it, all at once, in a single glittering heap, on the day he was set free. But we are getting ahead of ourselves again. For now, simply hold this in mind. In the world of the Roman soldier, bread was cheap, and life was cheap, and a man of modest wage could eat well and live decently on very little. His silver, though there was not much of it in his purse, stretched a long and comfortable way. Let that single silver coin, and the loaves and the wine and the distant dreamed of farm, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the question of how our soldier compared to the ordinary working people around him, and whether his lot was truly as good as I keep gently suggesting. It is one thing to say that the soldier's wage bought a good deal of bread. It is another to ask how he lived compared to the people around him, the bakers and the farmers and the labourers of the Roman world, the civilians who never took the oath. Was the soldier really better off? Or was his life of drill and danger simply a hard bargain dressed up in silver? The honest answer is that, for a poor young man with no land and no prospects, which is what most recruits were, the army was one of the best bargains going. Consider the alternatives. He might have stayed on the family farm, if there was one, working land that would be divided among too many brothers and could never support them all. He might have drifted to a city, to join the great mass of the urban poor, doing casual labour when he could get it, going hungry when he could not, crammed into a rented room in a rickety apartment block that might collapse or burn at any time, dependent on the free grain dole to stay alive. He might have hired himself out as a farmhand, working another man's fields for a bare subsistence, with nothing put by and nothing to look forward to but more of the same until his body gave out. Against those alternatives, the soldier's life shines. He had steady pay 3 or 4 times a year, guaranteed by the treasury of the empire itself. He had food that came whether the harvest failed or not, which for a farmer's son who had known hungry winters was no small thing. He had that free roof, that free heat, that free doctor. He had status, the pride and standing of a soldier of Rome, which lifted him above the common labourer in the eyes of the world. And he had, waiting at the end, the reward that would change his life. The civilian labourer had none of this. He worked until he could not, and then he was poor, and then he died, and there was no pension, and no farm, and no reward at the end of his road, only the road running out. There is a particularly telling little detail buried in the records. A peasant family of 4, in the countryside, might need somewhere around 70 denarii a year to cover their basic oil and wine and bread. 70 denarii to keep 4 people fed for a year. And the soldier earned 225, rising to 300, and got his own food provided on top of that. His wage, measured against the basic cost of keeping a family alive, was not the wage of a poor man at all. It was, by the standards of the ordinary working world, really rather good. Now, we must be fair, and we must be honest, because I promised you no false comfort. The soldier paid for this security with things the civilian kept. He paid with his freedom, signing away 25 years. He paid with his safety, standing in the battle line where the baker never had to stand. He paid with the ache of home, serving in distant provinces he had not chosen, among people whose language he did not speak. It was not a soft life. Nobody is saying it was a soft life, but it was a secure one, a provided one, a life with a floor beneath it, below which a man could not easily fall. And in a world where most people lived one bad harvest away from ruin, a life with a floor beneath it was a rare and precious thing. Let that comparison, the soldier and the baker and the labourer, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a hidden treasure, a bank vault buried beneath the most sacred spot in the entire fort, where the soldier's fortune was quietly growing while he slept. At the very heart of every Roman fort, in the headquarters building, in the middle of everything, there was a small and sacred room. It was a shrine, and in that shrine stood the standards of the unit, the tall poles topped with their emblems and their discs, and, for a legion, the great eagle of silver or gold that was the very soul of the army, the object the soldiers revered above almost anything, that must never be lost, that men would die to protect. This was the holiest spot in the fort, and it was also, of all things, the bank. Because beneath the floor of that shrine, or in strong boxes within it, guarded by the sanctity of the standards and the ever-present sentries, the soldiers kept their savings. The army, you see, did not let a soldier spend everything he earned. It could not if it wanted men to leave the service as settled citizens rather than penniless vagrants. So a portion of every soldier's pay was held back, banked, kept safe under the eagle, and it grew, payday by payday, year by year, into a sum that would be waiting for him when he needed it. This was a genuine saving system, run by the army, for the ordinary soldier, and it was in some ways ahead of anything the civilian world offered. The clerks kept careful accounts. Each man's savings were recorded against his name. He could not fritter the money away on dice and wine and the pleasures of the town, because he could not easily get at it. It sat there, under the standards, in the holiest and best guarded place in the fort, growing quietly while he drilled and marched and stood his watches, a slow accumulating wall against the future. There is a story that shows just how much money could pile up in these underfloor treasuries, and it is a slightly comic one. At one point, the Emperor Domitian became worried because a rebellious provincial governor had tried to use the soldiers' banked savings to fund an uprising. There was simply so much cash sitting under the standards of the legions that it could, in the wrong hands, pay for a rebellion. So Domitian made a rule. No soldier could bank more than a certain sum, a cap, a limit to stop these fortresses of coin from becoming war chests for ambitious men. Think about what that tells us. The savings of ordinary soldiers pooled together amounted to enough money to threaten the emperor himself. These were not destitute men. These were men with silver in the bank, so much silver that emperors lay awake worrying about it. And so our sleeping soldier, penniless on payday, his purse emptied by boots and barley and bread, was in truth growing richer with every passing season, whether he felt it or not. The money he never saw, the money held back and locked away beneath the eagle, was his, and it was waiting, and it was mounting up. He was, without quite realizing it, a man of savings. How many of us tonight, in our world of easy credit and hard rent, can say the same? How many of us have a growing wall of silver, safe and untouchable, building quietly against the day we will need it? The Roman soldier did. It sat beneath the holiest thing he knew, and it was one more way in which this supposedly poor man was, in the ways that count, quietly ahead of us. Let that hidden treasury beneath the standards, the soldier's secret growing fortune, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the days when the emperor himself reached into his own purse and made every soldier, for a moment, feel rich. Every so often, and never predictably, something wonderful happened. The emperor gave everyone money. It was called a donative, a gift, a special payment handed out to the soldiers on great occasions, and above all when a new emperor came to the throne. A new man taking the purple needed the army on his side, needed it desperately, because in the end it was the swords of the soldiers that made and unmade emperors. And so, on his accession, a new emperor would open his treasury and shower the legions with gold, buying their loyalty, thanking them for their support, binding them to his cause with the oldest and most reliable glue there is. And these gifts were not small. A donative could equal a full year's pay, or more, handed over in a single glittering moment, often in gold rather than silver, which made it feel grander still. Imagine it. You are our soldier, standing in the ranks, and word comes that the old emperor is dead and a new one has taken the throne. And with that word comes gold, a year's wages or more, dropped into your hands for having done nothing at all but be a soldier on the right day. It must have felt like winning a lottery you had not even known you had entered. For the ordinary legionary, the donatives were generous. For the elite Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own bodyguard in Rome, they were staggering. When the Emperor Claudius came to power, in a moment of chaos and danger, he is said to have promised each of his guardsmen a sum so vast, thousands of denarii apiece, that it amounted to many years of ordinary pay, a fortune handed to each man simply for accepting him as emperor. The Praetorians learned, over time, that they held the power to make an emperor, and that making one was extremely profitable, and this was not always good for the stability of Rome. But for the guardsmen on the receiving end, it was gold raining from the sky. Now, I want you to sit with the strangeness of this, because it is genuinely strange to modern ears. Imagine that every time your country changed its leader, you personally received a check for a year's salary, in gold, simply for being an employee of the state. Imagine the leadership changing hands and your first thought being, not worry, not politics, but delight, because you knew that the change meant money in your hand. It is an almost dreamlike arrangement, and it was a real and regular feature of the Roman soldier's financial life. On top of his steady wage, on top of his free housing and food and care, on top of his growing savings and his waiting pension, he had these sudden windfalls, these gifts from the most powerful man in the world, arriving every few years like unexpected weather. We have nothing like it. Our pay is our pay, and it does not rain gold when the government changes, and no powerful figure showers us with a year's wages for our loyalty. The soldier lived in a world where such things happened, where the sheer political importance of the army meant that its ordinary members were, again and again, made suddenly and deliciously richer by forces far above them. One more silver thread, or rather golden thread, in the surprisingly rich fabric of his life. Let those showers of imperial gold settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the oldest and roughest way a soldier grew rich, older than pay slips and pensions and donatives, the spoils of war. We have been talking, so far, about the gentle and orderly ways a soldier gained his wealth. The steady wage, the free provisions, the safe savings, the imperial gifts. But there was another way, older and darker and far less gentle. And to be honest about the Roman soldier's finances, we cannot leave it out. There was plunder. War, for Rome, was not only a matter of glory and empire, it was also, in the plainest terms, a business, and a profitable one, and the profit was shared, in its rough way, all the way down to the ordinary man in the ranks. When a Roman army took a city, or beat an enemy in the field, or overran a camp, everything of value became spoil, coin and jewelry and precious metal, weapons and armor, livestock and goods, and people, the captured enemy, who became slaves, and slaves, in the Roman world, were worth a great deal of money. All of this was gathered up and sold, and the proceeds divided, from the general at the top, down through the ranks, so that even the humblest soldier received his share. A successful campaign, a rich enemy, a well-sacked city, could put more silver in a soldier's purse than years of ordinary pay. This was the jackpot, the great uncertain prize that hung behind all the drilling and the marching and the danger. Serve in the right war, under the right general, against the right enemy, and you might come home with a small fortune won in a single bloody afternoon. I will not dress this up, because it does not deserve dressing up. This was wealth torn from other people's suffering. The gold in the soldier's purse had been someone else's gold. The slave he was allotted, and might sell for the price of a small farm, had been a free person that morning, with a home and a family and a name. The comfort we have been building all night, the cosy picture of the provided-for soldier, has this hard and bitter stone at the centre of it, and an honest telling has to hold the stone up to the light, even in a story meant for sleep. The Roman soldier's prosperity was built in part on the misery of the conquered. That is simply true, and we do him and them no service by pretending otherwise. And yet, from the soldier's own point of view, standing in his own sandals in his own hard century, the spoils were simply part of the deal, one of the reasons a poor young man took the oath in the first place. He knew the risks. He might die. He might be maimed. He might serve 25 years and see no great war and gather no great plunder. But he might also, if the dice fell his way, come through a campaign richer than his father had been in a lifetime of honest farming. That possibility, that glittering maybe, was part of what the army offered, part of the strange, rich bargain of the military life. So we add it to the ledger, with a heavy heart but an honest hand, steady pay, free provisions, safe savings, imperial gifts, and the hard, dark, dangerous chance of plunder. The soldier had many roads to modest wealth, and this was the oldest and the cruelest of them, and it was real, and it mattered, and we will not pretend it away. Let those hard-won and bitter spoils settle gently in the dark. We turn now to something softer and kinder, the plain daily bread of the soldier's life, the food on his board and the wine in his cup. Let us sit at the soldier's table, such as it was, and see what he ate, because the food of the Roman army tells us as much about his life as the coins in his purse. The foundation of it all was grain, wheat mostly, and barley, the plain staples that fed the whole ancient world. The soldier's daily bread was quite literally daily bread, ground from the ration of grain on the handmill of the tent, kneaded and baked into round flat loaves in the ovens built into the fort walls. Bread and more bread, and porridge made from the same grain when there was no time or fuel for baking, It was not exciting. It was not meant to be exciting. It was meant to fill a working man's belly and keep him marching. And it did. Around the bread gathered the other simple things. There was oil, olive oil, poured over the bread and cooked into the pottage, the great source of fat and richness in a diet that had little meat. There were vegetables, whatever could be grown or bought nearby, beans and lentils and onions and cabbage. There was cheese, and there was salt, precious salt, without which food would not keep and a body would not thrive. And there was meat, more than people often think, for the Roman soldier was no strict vegetarian. The bones dug up from the rubbish pits of the forts tell us he ate beef and pork and mutton, chicken and goose, and whatever the local country offered, deer and wild boar and fish. When times were good, the soldier ate well, a rough, hearty diet of bread and oil and beans and meat, plain but plentiful, the food of a working man who needed his strength. And to drink there was wine, not the fine wine of the senator's table, but the everyday stuff, thin and sour and cheap, often turned almost to vinegar. The soldiers had a particular drink they made from it, a sharp, watered-down vinegary wine called posca, that quenched thirst, and though they did not know the science of it, helped keep their water safe to drink. Posca was the soldier's companion on the march and in the field, sour and refreshing and faintly medicinal, and a ration of it was part of what the army provided. There is something very human in the picture of a Roman soldier, at the end of a long day, sitting down to his bread and his beans and his cup of sharp, sour posca, tired and fed and content in the simple animal way of a working man who has eaten enough. It was not luxury, but it was enough, and it was reliable, and reliability, in the matter of food, was itself a kind of luxury in the ancient world. The farmer feared the failed harvest. The city labourer feared the day there was no work and so no bread. The soldier, alone among the ordinary men of his world, could be reasonably sure that tomorrow, as today, there would be grain in the store and bread in the oven and a cup of something sour to wash it down. He ate the plain food of a poor man, but he ate it with the security of a rich one, and that, once again, is the quiet theme of our whole long night. Let that plain and plentiful table, the bread and the oil and the sour wine, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the fort itself as a kind of small town, and to the surprising comforts that grew up within and around its walls. A great Roman fort was not just a place where men slept between battles. It was a small town, a working community, with many of the comforts and conveniences of town life, and some that ordinary towns could only envy. Consider the bathhouse. Nearly every permanent fort had one, and it was not some grim, splashing trough, but a proper Roman bath, built to the same civilized pattern as the baths of the great cities. There was the changing room, and the cold plunge, and the warm room, and the hot room, heated by warm air flowing beneath the raised floor and up through the walls, so that a soldier could move from cool to warm to hot and back again, sweating out the grime of the drill field, scraping his skin clean with a curved metal tool, soaking in warm water in a cold country. Think of what that meant on a wet winter frontier, in the mud and the chill of the northern edge of the world. A hot bath, warm water, clean skin, a little pocket of Mediterranean comfort carried to the ends of the earth and made available to the ordinary soldier as a simple part of his week. Millions of people alive today, in poorer parts of our own world, do not have reliable access to hot, clean water. The Roman soldier on his frontier did. Consider the granaries, those clever raised buildings with their ventilated floors, where the grain was kept dry and safe and free of vermin, holding months and months of supply against any shortage or siege. The soldier's food security was not a matter of hope. It was a matter of engineering, of great buildings full of grain, deliberately stockpiled so that the men would eat even if the harvest failed or the enemy cut the roads. Where the civilian trusted to luck and the weather, the soldier trusted to the granary, and the granary was always full. And consider the little town that grew up outside the gates, the civilian settlement that clung to every long-term fort like a barnacle to a ship. They called it the Vicus. Here came the traders and the craftsmen and the tavern keepers, the people who wanted the soldiers' silver and were happy to provide, in exchange, the things the army did not. Here a soldier could buy a better cloak, a trinket for a sweetheart, a hot meal cooked by someone else, a jug of decent wine, the small pleasures and vices that make a hard life bearable. Here, too, lived the unofficial families of the soldiers, the women they were not, for much of the empire's history legally allowed to marry, and the children of those unions, all gathered at the edge of the fort in a busy, muddy, thriving little world of their own. So the soldier did not live in a bare barracks in the middle of nowhere. He lived at the centre of a small society, with baths and shops and taverns and company, a whole town's worth of comfort and human warmth built up around the hard core of the military life. It was, in its way, a good place to be, provided, warm, fed, entertained, and surrounded by people. Not a bad place at all to spend your one wild life. Let that town made of soldiers, with its warm baths and its full granaries and its busy muddy streets, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to one particular building within it, perhaps the most surprising of all, where the sick and the wounded were cared for at no cost. The hospital. Of all the comforts of the Roman fort, the one that startles modern people most, I think, is the hospital, because we tend to imagine the ancient world as a place of casual death, where the sick simply suffered and the wounded simply died. And there was plenty of death and plenty of suffering, and Roman medicine could do only so much. But the Roman army built hospitals, real hospitals, and staffed them with real physicians, and treated its soldiers in them for free. And this is not a small thing, it is an extraordinary thing. The military hospital was called the valetudinarium, and in a large fort it was a substantial building, carefully designed. It had a long corridor, or a series of them, off which opened small wards, quiet rooms, each holding a few beds, so that the sick could rest away from the noise and the crowd. There was an operating area. There were rooms for storing herbs and instruments and supplies. The whole thing was laid out with the same cool Roman logic as everything else, to keep the sick separate, the air moving, the space clean. Archaeologists digging up these buildings have found the surgical instruments still there, the probes and the forceps and the scalpels, tools of a medicine far more advanced than we usually credit. And the physicians who worked in them were skilled. The Roman army valued its doctors, because a healthy soldier was a valuable soldier, and a dead one was a wasted investment. Army physicians built up, over the years, a deep practical knowledge of wounds and their treatment, of broken bones and how to set them, of infections and how to fight them, with the limited but real weapons they had, the cleaning and the binding, the herbs that genuinely helped, the wine and vinegar that, though they did not know why, cleaned a wound and slowed its rot. A soldier wounded in battle or injured in training had a real chance of skilled care, and that care cost him nothing. Sit with that, in our own strange age, when so many people, in so many wealthy countries, lie awake at night worrying about the cost of being ill. When a broken bone or a sudden sickness can mean not only pain but ruin, bills that swallow savings, debts that outlast the illness itself. The Roman soldier did not carry that particular fear. When he fell sick, he went to the valetudinarium, and he was put to bed, and he was fed, and he was tended by trained hands, and when he was well, he went back to his unit, and at no point did anyone hand him a bill or ask how he would pay. His health care was simply part of the deal, a right of his service, as automatic as his bread and his bed. I am not going to tell you that Roman military medicine was better than ours. Of course it was not. They had no idea what a germ was. They lost men to infections we would shrug off, to diseases we have forgotten to fear. But they had grasped something that some of the richest societies in history have somehow let slip, which is that the people who serve you should not have to fear the cost of falling ill. The soldier of Rome, on his frontier, 2,000 years ago, had that security. And if you tonight do not, then here is one more place where the old dead soldier and the living you might quietly change places, and you might be the one to envy him. Let that quiet hospital, with its clean wards and its skilled hands and its unbilled care, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the letters that soldiers wrote and received, the little wooden postcards that let us hear their actual voices across the centuries. For a long time, the ordinary Roman soldier was silent to us. We knew his wages and his weapons and his fort, but we did not know his voice, the small daily words of his actual life. And then, in the wet ground of a fort in the north of Britain, at a place called Vindolanda, the earth gave up a treasure. Letters, hundreds of them, thin slivers of wood, no thicker than a postcard, written on in ink nearly 2,000 years ago and preserved by the airless mud, and on them, in the soldiers' own words, the small talk of their lives. They are the most human things imaginable. There is a letter about socks and underwear and sandals, a package from home or a request for one, because the frontier was cold and a man's feet suffered, and warm socks were worth writing about, then as now. There is a birthday invitation, one woman, the wife of a commander, inviting another to her birthday celebration, written partly in the hand of a scribe and partly in her own, and it is, as far as we know, one of the earliest surviving pieces of writing in Latin by a woman's own hand, and it is about a birthday party. There are letters about money owed and money lent, about the price of goods, about the movement of units, about a friend who should visit. There is a note that refers, a little rudely, to the local Britons, giving them a mocking nickname, the eternal grumble of the soldier, about the strange people among whom he finds himself posted. What these letters give us, more than any payslip or any wall, is the ordinariness of the soldier's inner life. He worried about his socks. He looked forward to a party. He was owed money by a friend and meant to collect it. He missed the people back home and wrote to them and waited for their replies. He was, in short, a person, as fully and completely a person as you are, lying there in the dark, with your own worries about small comforts, and your own looking forward to small pleasures, and your own people you miss. The armour and the eagles and the distance of the centuries fall away, and there he is, a man writing home about warm socks, and you could reach out and touch him. And notice too what the letters quietly confirm about the texture of his life. There was a postal system of sorts, letters and parcels moving along the great roads of the empire, so that a man on the very edge of the Roman world could send word home and receive word back, and have warm socks delivered to a frontier fort. There was trade and credit and correspondence, a whole web of connection stretching across thousands of miles, and the ordinary soldier sat within it, sending and receiving, buying and owing, a full participant in the busy commercial life of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. He was provided for by the army, and he was connected to the world, and he wrote home about his socks. It is such a small thing, and it is such a warm one, and it is exactly the sort of thing to hold in your mind as your thoughts begin to loosen and drift. A soldier, long ago, on a cold border, writing a letter home, waiting for the parcel, hoping for the socks. Let those little wooden letters, and the warm socks, and the birthday party settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the long grey middle of the soldier's service, the 25 years themselves, and what it meant to give so much of a life to the eagles. 25 years is a very long time. We have said it before, but it bears returning to, because it is the great weight at the centre of the soldier's bargain, the enormous price he paid for all the security we have been cataloguing. 25 years. A man who joined at 20 gave the army the whole strong heart of his life. From 20 to 45, the years in which a civilian might build a farm, raise a family, grow into himself, put down roots. The soldier gave those years to the service. He went where he was sent, and stayed where he was posted, and did what he was told, for a quarter of a century. He could not, for much of the empire's history, legally marry. He could not choose his home or his work or his company. He belonged, body and time, to the army and the emperor, and the 25 years stretched ahead of him when he was young, like a road with no visible end. And the work of those years was mostly not battle. This surprises people who imagine the soldier's life as one long war. In truth, for most soldiers in most years, the fighting was rare, and the real daily substance of the life was work. Endless work. There was drill, the constant practice of arms and formation, the drill that never stopped, because a soldier's skill was the thing that kept him alive. There was building, for the Roman army built ceaselessly, raising forts and walls and roads and bridges, draining marshes, quarrying stone, the soldiers themselves serving as the labourers and engineers of the empire's expansion. There was guard duty, the long watches on the wall, the tedium of standing and staring into the dark. There was the fetching and the carrying and the maintaining, the 1,000 small tasks of keeping a fort and an army running. It was, in a word, a job. A hard, physical, disciplined, often boring job, with strict rules and harsh punishments, and a boss who could have you flogged. The romance of the Eagles was real, but it lay over a daily reality of labour and routine and grind. And the soldier who dreamed of glory spent most of his actual days digging ditches and standing watches and polishing kit. Anyone who has ever had a long, secure, wearying job, with its comforts and its cage both, will recognize something of the soldier's 25 years. It kept him. It held him. It also, in a sense, owned him. Now and then, the weight of it grew too much, and the soldiers pushed back. There was a famous mutiny, early in the empire, when the old emperor died, and the legions on the frontier rose up, not in treason, but in grievance, complaining bitterly of exactly the things we have been describing: the length of the service, the harshness of the discipline, the way old men were kept in the ranks long past their strength, the way the pay was eaten by deductions, the way the promised rewards were slow to come. They were not wrong. The bargain was hard, and sometimes it was made harder by bad officers and broken promises, and the men knew it, and sometimes they said so, loudly and dangerously. The soldier's life was secure, but it was not soft, and the security was bought with a discipline and a length of servitude that we, in our restless freedom, would find very hard to bear. Let those long grey years, the drill and the building and the watches and the occasional roar of grievance, settle gently in the dark. We turn now, at last, toward the light at the end of them, the day of discharge, when the soldier was set free. And then, one day, after a quarter of a century, it ended. The service was complete. The oath was fulfilled. The soldier, now a man in his 40s, weathered and scarred and grey, had given the Eagles everything they had asked, and now the Eagles owed him, and it was time to pay the debt in full. The formal release was called an honourable discharge, onesta missio, and it was a real ceremony, a real legal event, marked and recorded. The veteran's name was struck from the rolls of the active army and entered onto the rolls of the discharged, the men who had served their time and earned their reward. For the auxiliary soldier, the discharge came with a remarkable object, a diploma, a document engraved on 2 small tablets of bronze, a personal copy of an imperial decree that recorded his service and granted him his reward, and that he would treasure and pass down because of what it contained. Many of these bronze diplomas survive, dug up across the old empire, and they are among the most precious records we have, because each one is the proof of one ordinary man's completed life of service, and the moment his long labor turned into lasting reward. Imagine the feeling of that day. 25 years. Every payday, every watch, every mile marched, every ditch dug, every winter endured on the frontier. All of it now behind you, complete, done. You are no longer a soldier, you are a veteran, which in the Roman world was a title of honor, a status, a thing to be proud of. You have survived, which many did not, and you are about to receive the great reward that has been waiting for you all along, the reward that was, in truth, the real wage of your whole career, the reason underneath all the other reasons that you gave the army your 25 years. There must have been a lightness to that day almost impossible to describe. The cage door open, the long sentence served, the whole rest of your life, however much of it remained, suddenly your own again, to spend as you wished, where you wished, with whom you wished, and not empty-handed, not turned out into the world with nothing, the way a worn-out labourer might be, used up and discarded. The Roman veteran walked out of his service into a waiting fortune, and it is to that fortune at last that we now turn, because it is the beating heart of our whole long, quiet argument. For all the security of his years of service, for all the free housing and food and care, it was this final reward, more than anything, that made the Roman soldier a man to be envied. It was this that lifted him, in a single day, from a wage earner into something close to a man of property. It was this that most of us, in our own long working lives, will never receive. Let us go and see it. Let that day of freedom, the open cage and the fulfilled oath and the waiting reward settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the reward itself, the veteran's fortune, the treasure at the end of the 25-year road. Here it is then, the reward, the thing that was waiting at the end of the road all along. When a Roman soldier completed his 25 years, he received on his discharge a reward the Romans called the premia, and it was, by any measure, a fortune. In the days of the first emperor, Augustus, who set the system in its lasting form, the reward was fixed at 3,000 denarii, 3,000 silver coins handed to a man who had earned 200 or 300 a year. It was more than 10 years of his ordinary wages, given to him in a single moment, at the very time in his life when he most needed a foundation to build the rest of his years upon. And later, as the coins lost value and the cost of things rose, the reward was raised to 5,000 denarii under a later emperor, keeping the promise real even as the money changed. And it was not always, or only, money. Often, instead of or alongside the cash, the veteran received land, a plot of good farmland his own, to keep and to work and to pass to his children. And this was, if anything, the greater prize, because land in the ancient world was the truest and safest form of wealth there was, the thing that made a man secure, respectable, rooted, a person of standing in his community. The empire used these land grants deliberately, settling its veterans in colonies across the provinces, on the frontiers, in newly won territory, so that the old soldiers became both farmers and a kind of reserve garrison, loyal Romans holding the land they had been given. But from the veteran's own point of view, the grand strategy hardly mattered. What mattered was this: he had gone in a poor young man with nothing, and he was coming out a landowner. Let us be very clear about the size of this, because it is the crux of everything. 3,000 denarii, or a farm, handed to a working man at the end of his career. We saw earlier that a small farm might be bought for a few thousand denarii. We saw that a peasant family could live for a year on 70. We saw that a cow cost 100 or so, a pig only 5. So the veteran's reward, 3,000 or 5,000 denarii, was enough to buy a farm outright, or to stock one richly, or to set up a business, or simply to live in modest comfort for the rest of a life. It was, in the truest sense, a fortune, life-changing money, the kind of sum that transforms a person's entire future in a single stroke. Now hold that up against your own life, gently, without distress, as you lie there warm in the dark. At the end of your working life, after your own long decades of labor, what will be waiting for you? For some, there will be a pension, carefully saved, if the plans held and the markets were kind. For many, there will be far less, a small state provision, a worry about whether it will stretch, a fear of the years when the earning stops but the bills do not. Very few of us will be handed, on our last day of work, a sum large enough to buy a house outright, free and clear, as a gift, a thank you, a reward for service. Very few of us will retire into instant security, made landowners in a single day. The Roman soldier did. That was the deal. That was always the deal, underneath all the others. Give us your 25 years, and we will make you, at the end, a man of property. Let that veteran's fortune, the 3,000 coins and the waiting farm, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the new life it brought him, the second life of the veteran, and the quiet dignity of the old soldier turned landowner. The veteran did not simply retire and fade. He began, in a real sense, a second life, and it was often a good one. Picture our man now, no longer young, his soldiering done, standing on his own land in a veteran colony somewhere in the provinces, perhaps in the sunny south of Gaul, perhaps in Spain, perhaps in the green valleys of the Danube or the warm plains of North Africa, wherever the empire had chosen to settle its old soldiers. He has his farm, or the money to buy one. He has his savings, that quiet fortune that grew beneath the standards all those years. He has, if he was an auxiliary, his hard-won citizenship, and the standing that comes with it. And he has his pride, the deep and lasting pride of a man who served his full term under the Eagles and came home whole. These veteran colonies were often prosperous, orderly places, and no wonder. They were full of men in the prime of late life, disciplined, capable, used to hard work and organization, suddenly possessed of land and money, and the freedom to use both. Many became substantial farmers. Some went into trade, using their lump sum to set up a workshop or a business, buying and selling in the busy markets of the empire. Some became local worthies, men of influence in their towns, sitting on councils, funding public works, respected elders who had seen the wide world and come back to run the affairs of home. The rough young recruit who had joined the army because his village offered him nothing could end his days as one of the leading men of a new town, a landowner, a citizen, a person of consequence. And he often married, now, openly and legally, the informal family of his service made formal, the children of the vicus made legitimate heirs. He could pass on his land to his sons. He could see his daughters married well. He could sit in the evening in the door of his own house, on his own ground, and watch the sun go down over fields that belonged to him, bought and paid for by 25 years of service, and feel, one imagines, a deep and settled satisfaction. This was the promise fulfilled. This was what the long grey years had been for. Not glory in the end, and not even the daily wage, but this, a home, a field, a family, a place in the world, secure and his own. There is a particular kind of peace in a life that ends better than it began, that climbs, over its long span, from nothing to something solid. The Roman soldier's life, for those who survived it, often had exactly that shape. It started in poverty and ended in property. It started with a frightened young man taking an oath he barely understood, and ended with a settled elder on his own land, his service behind him, his reward around him, his children provided for. Not every soldier lived to see it. Many died in service, of wound or illness, or the sheer attrition of the hard life. But for those who came through, the shape of the thing was profoundly hopeful, a long, slow rise towards security and dignity and rest. How many modern lives, I wonder, have that reassuring upward shape? How many of us can be confident of ending more secure than we began, of climbing steadily from struggle towards solid ground? Many of us fear the opposite, fear that the ground beneath us is thinning as we age, that the security our parents had is slipping from our grasp, that we will work and end with less than we hoped. The old soldier standing on his own land in the evening light would not have understood that fear. He had been promised a rising road, and he had walked it, and here he was at the top of it, home at last. Let that second life, the veteran on his own land in the evening light, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a reward stranger and greater than money or land, a reward that could not be spent or spent down, the gift of belonging itself, citizenship. For a great many of the men who served Rome, the greatest reward of all was not the silver and not even the land. It was a word, a status, a single precious thing that could not be bought at any price by most of the people in the empire, and that the army handed out at the end of the road to men who had started with nothing: Roman citizenship. We have to understand what citizenship meant, because it is easy to hear the word and think it a small legal technicality. It was not. In the Roman world, to be a citizen was to be a different order of person. The citizen had rights the non-citizen did not. He could not be casually tortured or subjected to the cruelest punishments. He had standing in the law, the ability to sue and to make binding contracts, and to have his marriage and his children recognized. He could vote in the times and places that voting meant anything. He was, in the deepest sense, a full member of the greatest club the world had ever known, protected by its laws, dignified by its name, able to say, as a shield against the world, the three proud words, "I am a Roman citizen." Now, the legions were recruited from citizens, but the auxiliaries, the great supporting body of the army, the archers and cavalry and light troops drawn from the conquered peoples of the empire, were mostly not citizens when they joined. They were provincials, Gauls and Thracians and Syrians and Britons and Moors, men from the edges, men of the subject peoples, and for them, service held out the most glittering prize imaginable. Serve your 25 years, complete your term with honor, and on your discharge, you would be made a citizen. You, the provincial, the outsider, the son of a conquered people, would become a Roman, with all that meant, and so, crucially, would your children. That was the meaning of the little bronze diploma we spoke of earlier, the treasured document of the discharged auxiliary. It was in large part a certificate of citizenship, the legal proof that this man and his descendants had been raised into the Roman people. It transformed not just his life, but his whole line. His children would be citizens. His grandchildren would be citizens. The single act of his service reached forward through the generations, lifting a whole family, forever, out of the subject class and into the ruling one. There has rarely been, in all of history, a clearer or more powerful engine for turning outsiders into insiders, the conquered into the conquerors, the poor provincial into the proud Roman. Think of what that would have meant to a young man from some far-flung corner of the empire, some village that had been stormed and subdued within living memory. He could not buy his way into the Roman people. No amount of ordinary work or ordinary luck would ever make him a citizen, but the army could, and the army would, in exchange for his 25 years. It was a ladder, perhaps the single greatest ladder of social advancement in the ancient world, and it was open to any provincial tough enough and lucky enough to survive the climb. He gave his service, and he received at the end, not just money and land, but belonging itself, a new and higher identity for himself, and every descendant he would ever have. We should envy him this, too, in our way. For all our talk of open societies, How many of us can lift our entire family line, permanently, into a higher and safer station by a single act of service? How many of us hold, or could ever earn, a prize that reaches forward through the generations the way the auxiliary's citizenship did? He was handed the keys to belonging, and he passed them to his children, and they to theirs. It was the richest reward of all, and it did not weigh a single ounce. Let that gift of belonging, the citizenship that reached forward through the generations, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to gather up all these threads, all the wages and rewards and provisions, into a single ledger, and to weigh the whole life of the soldier against the whole life of a modern working person. Let us do the accounting now, gently, the way you might tally up an old and complicated bill, not to worry over it, but simply to see the whole shape of it at last. Let us lay out everything the Roman soldier received across his whole life and set it all down in one place. He received his pay 3 or 4 times a year, a steady, dependable wage, modest but solid, comparable to a skilled craftsman's, and better by far than the labourer's or the farm hands. That is the first line of the ledger, and it is the line most people stop at, the line that Gaius Messius's sad slip records, the pay that the deductions ate. But then come all the other lines, the ones the slip never showed. He received his housing, free, for 25 years, the single greatest expense of a modern life simply lifted from his shoulders. He received his food, reliable, plentiful, guaranteed against famine and failure. He received his heat, and his light, and his fuel. He received the use of the baths, hot water in a cold world. He received his medical care, real care in a real hospital, at no cost, without fear of ruin. He received the safety of the granary, the security of the fort, the protection of belonging to the most powerful organization in the world. Then come the growing lines, the wealth that accumulated. He received the forced savings that piled up beneath the standards, a wall of silver building quietly year by year. He received the donatives, the showers of imperial gold that fell every few years like unexpected weather. He received his share of plunder, the hard and bitter chance of sudden riches from a successful war. And then, at the end, come the great final lines, the rewards that crowned it all. He received his discharge bonus, 3,000 denarii or more, a fortune large enough to buy a farm. He received, often, the land itself, making him a property owner in a world where property was the truest wealth. And he received, if he was a provincial, the priceless gift of citizenship, for himself and all his descendants forever. Add it all up, not just the wage, but the whole ledger, the housing and the food and the fuel and the baths and the doctor and the savings and the gold and the plunder and the pension and the land and the citizenship. Set the whole thing down together, and the sad little payslip of Gaius Messius, with its empty payday purse, looks like the smallest and least important part of a very rich arrangement indeed. He walked away from his payday with nothing in his hand, yes, but he was walking through a life so thoroughly provided for, so wrapped in security from cradle of service to grave of retirement, that the empty purse hardly mattered. The wealth was all around him, in the roof and the food and the care and the promise, and it was simply too large and too constant to fit on a slip of papyrus. That is the whole ledger of the Roman soldier, and it is against that whole ledger, and not against the wage alone, that we must, at last, measure ourselves. Let that whole ledger, the long list of everything the soldier truly received, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the hard question at the very centre of our title, and to the strange and humbling comparison it invites. So, are you poorer than a Roman soldier? Let us ask the question properly now, gently and fairly, having laid out the whole ledger, and let us begin by being honest about the ways in which you are, of course, immeasurably richer, because there are many, and it would be foolish and false to pretend otherwise. You live longer, most likely, far longer than the Roman soldier could dream of. You are spared the diseases that carried off so many of his comrades, protected by a medicine that would seem to him pure sorcery. You will probably never see a battlefield, never feel the terror of the shield wall, never watch a friend die of a wound that a modern doctor would close in an afternoon. You have comforts he could not imagine, warmth at the turn of a dial, light at the flick of a switch, food from every corner of the earth, knowledge and music and stories without end, pouring from a small glass rectangle in your hand. You are free in ways he never was. Free to choose your work and your home and your love. Free to leave a job that does not suit you. Free to walk away. Free to become almost anything you can imagine. By these enormous measures, you are richer than any Roman soldier, richer than any Roman emperor, richer than almost anyone who lived before the modern age. Never forget that, and never fail to be grateful for it. And yet, in the narrow and particular ways we have spent all night exploring, there are real things the soldier had that you may not, and it is worth naming them plainly, not to make you sad, but to help you see your own life more clearly. He had housing that cost him nothing for his whole career. Do you? He had healthcare he never had to fear the price of. Do you? He had food guaranteed against any disaster. He had savings piling up whether he attended to them or not. He had, waiting for him with total certainty at the end of his service, a reward large enough to make him a landowner in a single day. And he had, running under all of it, the deep security of knowing how his story would end, and knowing that it would end with a roof and a field and enough. That security, that certainty, that provision, is the thing so many of us have quietly lost, and did not quite notice losing. We have won astonishing freedom and astonishing comfort, and we have paid for them, without fully realizing it, in security. We are freer than the soldier and less safe. We have more choices and fewer guarantees. We can become anything, and we might lose everything, and the two are the same coin. The soldier made the opposite bargain. He gave up his freedom and his choices and his safety of body, and in exchange he was held, provided for, made certain of his future, in a way that we, for all our wealth, are not. So the answer to the question is not a simple yes or no. You are richer than the Roman soldier in almost every way that can be counted, and poorer than him in a few particular ways that cannot be counted, but can be deeply felt. You have the freedom he lacked. He had the security you lack. And on a quiet night like this one, lying warm in the dark, it is worth simply holding both truths at once, gently, without needing to resolve them. Your ancestors made trades to get here. Every age trades one good thing for another, and the Roman soldier, penniless on payday, provided for unto death, is a mirror in which we can see, more clearly, both the great riches and the quiet poverty of our own strange time. Let that hard and humbling question, and its gentle, unresolved answer, settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the day the whole system began to break, when the coins themselves lost their meaning, and even the soldier's security began to crumble. No good thing lasts forever, and the comfortable world of the well-provided soldier was no exception. In the end, it broke, and the way it broke is a story worth telling, quietly, before we let the fort fall asleep, because it carries a lesson that echoes down to our own day. For a long time, the system worked because the money was sound. A denarius was a real coin, made of real silver, and it held its value, and a wage or a pension counted in denarii meant something solid and dependable. But over the long centuries of the empire, the emperors fell into a terrible temptation, the same temptation that has ruined the money of many states before and since. They began to cheat the coin. Each time they needed more money than they had, to pay the soldiers, to fund the wars, to buy the loyalty of the legions, they made the denarius with a little less silver in it, and a little more cheap base metal, and minted more coins from the same amount of precious metal. It seemed clever. It seemed like magic, more money from nothing. But it was not magic. It was slow poison. Because as the silver in the coin shrank, the value of the coin shrank with it, and prices began to rise. The bread that cost 1 coin now cost 2, then 5, then 10. This is the thing we call inflation, and once it takes hold it is very hard to stop, and the later Roman emperors let it run wild. They raised the soldiers' pay, again and again, to keep them loyal, but the raises were swallowed by the rising prices as fast as they were granted, and faster. A soldier under a later emperor might be paid a number of coins that sounded enormous next to the old wage of 225, and yet find that his grand new wage bought him less bread than his grandfather's modest one had. The security that had rested on sound money began to dissolve as the money itself dissolved, coin by debased coin. And this struck at the very heart of the soldier's old comfort. That wonderful pension, 3,000 denarii, life-changing money, a farm in a single stroke. What happened to it when the denarius became a sliver of silver-washed base metal, worth almost nothing? It became, in real terms, a shadow of itself. The promise could still be made in the old numbers, but the numbers no longer meant what they had meant. The whole beautiful machine of provision and reward, which had rested all along on the quiet foundation of trustworthy money, began to grind and fail as that foundation crumbled. You cannot in the end provide real security with fake money, and the later empire learned this lesson the hard and bitter way, across generations of rising prices and falling trust and gathering chaos. There is a lesson in this for every age, and I will not labor it, because it is nearly time to sleep. But hold it gently as you drift. The soldier's security was real only so long as the money was real. When the coin was debased, when the silver was quietly stolen out of it by the very authorities meant to guarantee it, the whole edifice of provision built upon it began to fall. Sound money is a quiet thing, easy to take for granted when you have it, catastrophic to lose. The Romans learned that at the end. We would do well to remember it. But that is a worry for the daylight, not for now. For now, let it go. Let that failing silver and the slow dissolving of the soldier's certain world settle gently in the dark. We turn now, as the night deepens, back to our own sleeping soldier in his bunk, and toward the quiet that gathers over the fort as the fires burn low. There is one more kind of wealth we should count before the fort falls asleep, and it is the wealth of possibility, the chance the army gave an ordinary man to rise, because the soldier's career was not a flat and hopeless plain. It was a ladder, and a man with strength and sense and luck could climb it. He might begin as a common soldier in the ranks, but he could be promoted, first to the junior posts that carried extra pay, the men who guarded the standards, the clerks who kept the records, the specialists who had a trade. He could rise to be a centurion, one of the tough professional officers who were the backbone of the whole army. And a centurion earned many times the pay of a common soldier, a genuinely substantial income that lifted him into real prosperity. And at the very top of that particular ladder stood the first centurion of a legion, the primus pilus, the senior fighting officer, who earned a fortune each year and who, on completing that office, was raised into the lower ranks of the Roman nobility itself, entering the class of knights, the equestrians, becoming a gentleman of standing whose sons might rise higher still. Think of the span of that. A poor boy from a nowhere village could enlist with nothing, climb through the ranks by merit and courage over the long years, and end his career not merely as a comfortable veteran with a farm, but as a knight of Rome, a member of the propertied elite, his family launched into the higher reaches of society. It did not happen to most men, of course. Most rose a little or not at all, and were content or not with the ordinary rewards. But the ladder was there, and it was real, and it was climbed, again and again, by men who started at the very bottom, and the ladder did not stop even at the equestrian order. In the later, wilder centuries of the empire, when the army made and unmade emperors at will, the ultimate prize came within reach of the common soldier in a way that beggars belief. There were emperors of Rome, rulers of the entire known world, who had begun their lives as ordinary soldiers, peasant boys who enlisted in the ranks and rose, through ability and ferocity and the chaos of the times, all the way to the purple. The son of a Thracian herdsman wore the crown. Rough soldiers from the hard provinces of the Balkans seized the throne and held it. The distance from the muddy bunk to the imperial palace, though vast, was not, in the Roman army, entirely unbridgeable. The ladder ran, in theory, all the way to the top of the world. We should not overstate it. For every soldier who became a knight or an emperor, there were thousands who lived and died in the ranks. But the possibility was there, and possibility itself is a kind of wealth, a kind of hope, a reason to endure the hard years and do the work well. The soldier could dream, and his dream was not entirely foolish, because he could see, here and there, men not so different from himself, who had climbed the ladder and reached the heights. In a world that was mostly rigid, mostly fixed, where most people died in the station they were born to, the army was a rare and precious thing, an engine of rising, a road upward for the low-born and the bold. One more form of richness, then, to add to our long ledger. Not silver this time, and not land, but the open ladder, and the hope that went with it. Let that ladder upward, and the peasant boys who climbed it to fortune and even to thrones settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the gods the soldier prayed to, and to the strange dark temples where he sought them. A soldier in a dangerous trade, far from home, at the mercy of luck and weather and the enemy, is a soldier who prays. And the Roman soldier had a great crowd of gods to pray to, an entire heaven of powers and protectors, and his religious life was as rich and layered as everything else about him. There were the great gods of the Roman state, first of all whom the army worshipped as a matter of duty and identity. Jupiter, the king of the gods, the lord of the sky and of victory, honoured with a fresh altar year by year. The spirit of the emperor himself, revered as something close to divine. And, most sacred of all to the soldier, the standards, those tall poles with their eagles and their discs, which we have already visited in their shrine at the heart of the fort. The standards were not merely flags. They were holy objects, the very soul and honour of the unit, worshipped almost as gods in their own right, anointed and garlanded on festival days, guarded with a devotion that ran far deeper than mere discipline. To lose a standard was a disgrace beyond bearing. To die defending one was a glory. The soldier's faith and the soldier's pride were bound up together in that quiet shrine, among the eagles and the silver. But beyond the official gods, the soldier reached for more personal powers, and here we find one of the most fascinating things about the whole military world. Many soldiers, especially in the middle centuries of the empire, followed a mysterious god named Mithras, in a secret religion brought from the east, and the cult of Mithras was, above all, a soldier's religion. They worshipped him in strange and wonderful temples, built underground or made to feel underground, long dim cave-like rooms buried beneath the earth, lit only by lamps, where the initiated gathered in the dark to share sacred meals and rise, step by step, through the grades of the mystery. The details of what they believed and did are largely lost to us, kept secret then and secret still, which only deepens the strange romance of it. But we know it was a religion of brotherhood, of loyalty, of light won out of darkness, of a soldierly striving upward through trials toward salvation, and we can see why it spoke so powerfully to fighting men. All across the empire, wherever the soldiers went, these little underground temples of Mithras were dug and built and filled with quiet worshippers, and their remains are found today beneath the old forts and the old cities, dark stone rooms that once held the secret prayers of Roman soldiers. There is something deeply human and deeply restful in the picture of these hard men gathering in the lamplit dark to seek their God. For all their armor and their discipline and their violence, they were, like all people in all ages, reaching for something beyond themselves, something to hold them in the dangers of their trade, something to promise them that the darkness was not the end. The soldier who stood watch in the cold, who marched into the terror of battle, who lay awake wondering if he would see his home again, needed his gods, and he found them, in the official altars and in the secret caves alike. And having prayed, having sought his protectors, and made his peace with the powers of the world, he could lie down and sleep a little easier in the dark. Let those crowded heavens, the eagles in their shrine, and the secret God in his lamplit cave settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a tenderer matter, the families that soldiers were forbidden to have, and had anyway. For much of the history of the empire, the Roman soldier was not allowed to marry. It is one of the hardest and strangest facts of his life, and one of the most human in the way he got around it. The reasoning was cold and practical. A soldier was supposed to belong wholly to the army, movable at a moment's notice, undistracted by a wife and children, unencumbered by the ties of home, so the law simply forbade it. During his 25 years of service, the soldier could not contract a legal marriage. Any union he formed had no standing in law. Any children he fathered were, in the eyes of the state, illegitimate, unable to inherit from him as a proper heir should. The army wanted soldiers, not family men, and it wrote that want into the law. And yet, of course, the soldiers fell in love and formed households and had children because they were human beings, and no law has ever stopped human beings from doing that. In the little towns that grew outside the forts, the vicus we visited earlier, the soldiers kept their unofficial wives and raised their unofficial families, in unions that everyone knew about and everyone treated as real, whatever the law pretended. A soldier might live for decades with the same woman, love her, raise their children together, build a whole shared life, and the state would go on insisting, on paper, that none of it existed. It is a poignant thing to sit with, the gap between the cold law and the warm reality, the family that was forbidden and thriving at the same time, just outside the gate. The soldiers minded, and they worked around it, and slowly, over the generations, the reality wore the law down. Ways were found to provide for the unofficial families, to pass on property despite the rules, to soften the harsh edges of the ban. And in time, a wise emperor, Septimius Severus, who understood that a contented soldier was a loyal soldier, simply lifted the ban and let the soldiers marry openly and legally at last, giving their long-standing families the recognition they had always deserved. The law, in the end, bowed to the stubborn human truth it had tried so long to deny. People will love and make families and build homes, whatever their rulers decree, and the ban on the soldier's marriage was always a wall built against a river, and the river, as rivers do, eventually won. There is a warmth in this, under the sadness, and it is a good thing to carry towards sleep. Even in the hard machine of the Roman army, even under a law that forbade it, love found its way, and families grew, and children were raised in the shadow of the fort by parents who were not supposed to be parents at all. The soldier, for all that the state tried to make him a creature of pure service, remained a man who wanted what people have always wanted: a partner, a home, children, a hand to hold in the evening. And he got them, law or no law, in the muddy, thriving little town outside the walls, where the forbidden families lived and loved and endured. Let those forbidden families and the love that outlasted the law settle gently in the dark. We turn now, as the hour grows late, to the quiet of the fort at night, and the men who kept watch while their comrades slept. It is deep night now, in our fort on the frontier, and almost everyone is asleep. Let us walk its quiet streets one last time, softly, and let the peace of the sleeping camp begin to seep into you and carry you down toward your own sleep. The barrack rows are dark and still. Behind each door, the 8 men of each tent lie wrapped in their wool, breathing slow and deep, their boots by the bunks, their weapons in easy reach out of the long habit of the soldier, though no enemy is near tonight. The day's drill is done, the day's bread is eaten, the day's work is finished. The great machine of the army has run down into rest, as it does every night, all across the empire, in 1,000 forts from the cold north to the hot south. Hundreds of thousands of men sleeping at once beneath the same wheeling stars. On the walls, the sentries keep their watch. This was one of the soldiers' oldest and most constant duties, the night watch, the standing guard in the dark hours while the others slept. It was cold, and it was dull, and it was strangely sacred, this keeping of the wall, this staying awake so that others might safely sleep. The sentry paced his stretch of rampart and blew on his hands, and watched the black land beyond the ditch, and listened to the small sounds of the night, the wind, an owl, the shift of a horse in the stable below. Now and then the guard was changed, the tired men relieved by the rested, the watchwords quietly exchanged, and the fort passed the long night from hand to hand, from watch to watch, until the dawn. There is something in that image I find deeply peaceful, and I offer it to you now as a kind of gift to sleep on. All through the dark, someone is awake and watching, so that everyone else may rest. The sleeping soldiers do not have to worry, do not have to keep one eye open, do not have to guard themselves, because the sentry on the wall is guarding them. They can let go completely, sink into the deepest sleep, trusting the watch to hold the night. It is one of the oldest comforts there is, the knowledge that someone is keeping watch, that you are held and guarded and safe, that you may lay down the whole weight of your vigilance and simply rest. And you may do the same now, tonight. You do not have to keep watch over your own life this moment. You do not have to hold your worries up and turn them over in the dark. Whatever needs guarding will keep until morning. Whatever needs solving can be solved in the light. For now, in this hour, you are like the sleeping soldier in his bunk, safe within the walls, while the watch is kept for you, and you may let go of everything, all of it, and sink down into rest as completely and trustingly as he does. Let that quiet night watch, the sentry on the wall, and the sleeping men he guards, settle gently in the dark. We turn now, softly, to the things these men left behind, the small traces by which we know them still. It is strange and moving to think how much of these ordinary men has survived, and how we know them at all, across so vast a gulf of years. We know them by their stones. All across the old empire, in museums and along old roads and built into the walls of later churches, stand the tombstones of Roman soldiers, carved with their names and their years and their units, set up by the comrades who had paid into the burial club, or by the wives and children they left behind. This man served 22 years. This man died at 40, after a long service. This man is remembered by his heirs, who set up this stone. They wanted to be remembered, these soldiers, wanted their names to outlast them, and in a way they could not have imagined, they have. We stand before their stones 2,000 years later, and we read their names aloud, and for a moment they are not forgotten, and the wish they carved in stone comes quietly true. We know them by their rubbish, the things they threw away and lost and left behind, dug up now with tender care from the mud of their old forts, the worn-out boots, the broken pots, the gaming pieces and the dice, the little shrines and the amulets, the coins dropped and never found until now. And above all the writing, the pay-slip of Gaius Messius, the wooden letters of Vindolanda, the endless records and accounts and notes of an army that wrote everything down, Thousands upon thousands of small documents that let us hear, faint but clear, the actual voices of the men. The one who wanted socks, the one who was owed money, the one who invited a friend to a birthday party, the one whose pay came to exactly nothing after the deductions, and who noted it down, and whose note we can still read. They did not know they were speaking to the future. They were just living their lives, keeping their accounts, writing their letters, burying their dead, doing the small, ordinary business of ordinary days. And yet here they are, reaching us across the enormous dark of 20 centuries, more real and more human with every fresh discovery, no longer faceless figures in bronze armor, but people, individual and particular and known, with names and worries and warm socks and empty purses, and hopes for the future and dread of the cold. The soldier we have followed all night, our man in the bunk, is a kind of portrait made from all of them, from all those stones and letters and slips, a composite of the countless real men who lived this life and left these traces, and what they leave us, in the end, beyond the history and the facts and the long ledger of their wealth, is something simpler and kinder. They leave us the knowledge that people have always been people, that across all the centuries and all the vast changes, a working man has always wanted his warm socks and his full belly and his safe old age, has always looked forward to a party, always missed his home, always hoped to end better than he began. You are lying there tonight worrying, perhaps, about some of the very things Gaius Messius worried about: money, security, the future, the cost of things, and it may be a small comfort as you drift off to know that a soldier of Rome worried about them too, long ago, and that his story, in the end, came out all right, and that yours very likely will as well. Let those things they left behind, the stones and the letters and the warm human traces, settle gently in the dark. We turn now, at the very last, to the fort as it sinks into its final sleep, and to your own rest, which is coming now and near. The fires have burned down to embers now, low and red and glowing in the dark. The last of the smoke rises straight up into the still night air. The fort is silent, wholly silent, but for the small sounds of the night and the soft tread of the sentry on the wall. Our soldier sleeps. He lies in his bunk, in his small room, among the 7 other men of his tent, and his breathing is slow and deep and even. Whatever the day asked of him, he has given it, and it is over now, and he rests. Tomorrow there will be drill again, and work again, and the long routine of the service. But that is tomorrow, and it does not exist yet, and he does not carry it into his sleep. He has learned the soldier's oldest wisdom, which is to rest fully when rest is given, to sleep when it is time to sleep, to let the day go completely and sink into the dark without holding anything back. He does not dream of pay slips or pensions or the price of bread. He does not lie awake tallying his ledger, counting his savings beneath the standards, worrying over the farm he will one day own. All of that is real, and all of that is waiting, safely, in its place. But now, in the deep of the night, he simply sleeps, held by the walls, guarded by the watch, provided for by the great machine that surrounds him, as free of care in this hour as a man can be. His purse may be empty, but his sleep is rich and deep and untroubled, and there is a wealth in that too, perhaps the truest wealth of all. And the empire sleeps around him, the whole vast thing, from the walls of the north to the deserts of the south. In 1,000 forts, hundreds of thousands of men lie sleeping, just as he does, safe behind their walls, guarded by their watches, held in the arms of the great order that fed and housed and paid them. The sentries keep the night, the embers glow and fade. The stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that have turned over every sleeping soldier since the beginning of the world, and will turn over you tonight and every night, whether you see them or not. And you, my friend, are sinking now toward the same deep rest. You have followed the soldier through his whole long life, from the frightened boy taking his oath to the settled veteran on his own land, from the empty payday purse to the waiting fortune, from the cold frontier to the warm hearth of his second life. You have counted his whole ledger and weighed it against your own, and found perhaps a little more peace with your own strange, rich, precarious life than you had before. And now the counting is done, and the story is nearly told, and there is nothing left to do but let go, and follow the sleeping soldier down into the dark, and rest. Let all of it, the fort and the soldier and the long ledger and the whole quiet night, settle gently in the dark. We turn now, one last time, only towards sleep. There is nothing more you need to hear tonight, nothing more to learn, nothing more to hold, nothing more to do. The story is told. The soldier sleeps in his bunk, and the fort sleeps around him, and the empire sleeps around the fort, and now it is your turn, and only your turn to sleep. Let your body grow heavier still. Feel it sinking down, down, into the warmth beneath you, every muscle loosening, every small holding place letting go, your feet and your legs growing heavy and warm, your hands and your arms resting soft and still, your shoulders sinking, your breath slow and low and easy, moving in and out of you, all on its own, asking nothing of you at all. There is nothing to guard tonight. The watch is kept. There is nothing to carry tonight. It has all been set down. There is nothing to solve, and nothing to fear, and nowhere to be, and nothing to do, but lie here in the warm dark and drift, slowly, gently, down and down and down towards sleep. If thoughts still come and let them go, like sentries changing on a distant wall, quiet footsteps that need not wake you. Let the last images fade now, softly, the glowing embers, the silent barracks, the soldiers' slow breathing, the stars turning over the sleeping fort. Let them all grow dim and soft and far away, as you sink deeper and deeper and let go of the last of the day and the last of the light and the last of your waking thoughts. You are safe. You are warm. You are held. You have nothing to do now but rest. Good night, traveler. Rest easy. Sleep deep. I'll be here, somewhere in the quiet, when you wake.